and I now hand over to you to do this very brief report. We don't envisage to keep you here for 3 hours. We know you have important work to do, and we also have important work to do this afternoon in the National Assembly that we must prepare for, as well as the NCOP. But over to you, Auditor General.
Thank you very much, Honourable Froelich. Good morning to you. Warm greetings to Honourable Nyambi, your co-chair. I'd like to greet all of the honourable members of Parliament that are on the call, the support staff from Parliament, and of course the members of Team A. Thank you very much, Honourable Froelich, for this opportunity for us to share an update on the work that we've conducted on the flood relief programs, specifically in KZN and in the Eastern Cape, and we'll also touch on the Northwest, that being the province that you had expressed some interest in the last time we spoke. Honourable members, I think it's important for me to start my feedback by reflecting on the MFMA general report that I tabled just about 2 weeks ago. In that report, we highlighted that local government faces greater demands than ever before to regain the trust of South Africans and to provide essential services such as clean water, sanitation, electricity, waste management, and well-maintained roads and infrastructure, and to do so in a prompt and financially responsible manner. What we have found is that municipalities continue to neglect municipal infrastructure because what they tend to do is be reactive in terms of dealing with maintenance, and they also don't ensure that new projects for new infrastructure are put into the ground in the way that is consistent with good governance, good management, so that those projects are installed within the relevant time periods at the right price and at the right quality. What we are clear about is that service delivery must be planned and it must be based on the needs of communities and on the budgets and the resources that municipalities have available to them. Service delivery must also be managed right across the year, and the achievements or lack thereof against what was budgeted for and planned for and promised, that should be reported in a way that's credible and transparent. Unfortunately, we continue to see that municipalities do not adequately plan for delivering services, key basic services. They do not report credibly on what's done, and many of them do not even reach the targets that have been promised. This all hampers accountability, as there's little transparency as to the true state of local government's delivery of key basic services such as water, sanitation, and electricity. In our report, we highlighted 3 root causes. The first one being that there are inadequate skills and capacities in local government. The second one was relating to governance failures within the municipalities themselves, but also when we looked into the council level as also across into the provincial and national government as well. And then we are also highlighted that the continued lack of consequences when things go wrong also contributes to the failures of local government. These root causes will sound familiar to you because we would have communicated them before. And I highlight them as I start this report on, or this update on the flood relief efforts, because that is the context within which municipalities are implementing their relief efforts to respond to the flood disaster. The next slide, Honourable Chairpersons, just reminds everybody that ours is an independent audit mandate founded in the Constitution. However, we've adopted a posture that says we are part of an accountability ecosystem, and the work that we do must be about delivering value and making an important contribution towards strengthening our democracy, specifically in terms of strengthening the systems of transparency, of accountability, and of performance across all the public institutions that we are mandated to audit. Within the ecosystem of accountability, which I'm quite sure that the honourable members are very familiar with, I want to just highlight what we saw in terms of the design of the accountability ecosystem relevant to responding to the disaster. A reminder is that accountability ecosystem deals with different players with different roles that are given to them, that we believe if everybody is effective in operating within their mandate and there is adequate cooperation and collaboration, we'll be able to start getting better transparency, better accountability, and importantly, better delivery. In the context of the disaster itself, there were a few interesting role players that might not apply in different parts, in different contexts. When we did our first report, we highlighted that the following structures were in place. At the national level, there was the Oversight Committee on the National State of Disaster, chaired by the DG in the presidency, and that is attended by the accounting officers and other senior managers. And then there's the National Joint Flood Coordination Committee, which is chaired by the DG from COCTA. And then there's also the Intergovernmental Committee on Disaster Management, which is then led by the member of Cabinet. I beg your pardon, if I can just move down to, and then in the provinces, there were similar structures put in place to mirror what was now put in the national sphere. What was encouraging about all of this is that lessons that we had learned out of the COVID response were now starting to get expression at the national level, but importantly in terms of how the provinces operated. What we are seeing, though, is that over and above the design, the implementation of key controls is still not at the right level, but at least it is encouraging to see the type of oversight and monitoring capability and attention that was put into dealing with the response to the flood disaster. One of the things that we reported on in the Eastern Cape last time around, you'll recall, was around the very delayed actions in responding to the disaster. And I'm aware that the honourable members of Parliament, and specifically of this committee, were concerned that there wasn't enough traction in the Eastern Cape. And we'll talk a little bit more about that to give you some insight on what it is we've seen, especially having done our local government audits in the recent past. In the Eastern Cape, what we found, though, was that the Provincial Disaster Management Centre was activated, and they did highlight to municipalities the importance of putting in key controls around assessments in terms of what needs to be done, assessing the damage and prioritizing the initiatives to deal with that damage, and also to deal with the monthly reporting. And so that is encouraging that at least that did happen within the province, but we'll give you a sense of how it came to pass within the actual response. On the next slide, I think what we'll do is we'll just highlight for you once again that following the report that we tabled on the 31st of August of 2022, where we dealt with social relief, where we did work on water and sanitation, specifically on water tankering services, looking particularly at initiatives within the Department of Water and Sanitation, KZN, COCTA, and eThekwini Metro. You recall that we also looked at the repairs to government buildings, specifically the work done by PMTE, the Property Management Trading Entity. We dealt in a large amount of detail with the mobile classrooms, the mobile units that were put in place by the KZN Education Department in response to the needs at schools. And we also spent quite a bit of time dealing with the human settlements response in terms of the temporary residential units in KZN. At that stage, the majority of the interventions were in the PFMA cycle. Other than eThekwini, the rest were really in the PFMA cycle, and that there were PFMA auditees. I think it's also good that we just remind you that there were some good practices, despite the many findings that we shared with you at the time around delivery failures, impact assessments not being done, ineffective monitoring of contractors, slow response that we saw, the limited responsiveness in the Eastern Cape, and procurement problems. There were some green shoots that we were starting to see. As I indicated, some of the structures were being set up, and they'd been set up in good time. The National Treasury provided early guidance by issuing circulars that related to accessing available funding sources, and also to the reporting requirements that would follow those funding sources. We were encouraged by the pre-audits that were put in place on procurement processes by the KZN Provincial Treasury. You may recall we talked a lot about how that was encouraging because it was now one of the key players in the accountability ecosystem taking their role quite seriously and being actively engaged in giving monitoring and more oversight on contracts that were beyond R1 million so that they were subjected to an additional level of scrutiny before those awards were made. And we also saw that the combined assurance model in KZN worked quite well with the provincial treasury, as I mentioned, but also with internal audit within the KZN, where at KZN Education, the work that the AGSA did on those mobile classrooms and on the TRUs, the internal auditors of the department also went to check. They had similar findings, and those could then be acted upon. So those were the good practices that we saw, in that at least the oversight committees were there. There was early guidance. There was activity by players in the ecosystem, the provincial treasury, internal audit. And then what we saw is that where poor quality was seen, or where there were risks on procurement, payments were withheld until there was clarity about what needed to be paid, so that there wouldn't be payment for no value. And we also saw that some of the recommendations that we gave following that report were actually implemented, and promptly so. In the next phase of our work, which is the thrust of what I'll share with you today, what we did was that we incorporated into our audits for municipalities, specifically in KZN and the Eastern Cape, an assessment of how they were spending the flood relief grants and funds, and also implementing the relevant initiatives. In KZN, our focus was on water supply, on infrastructure related to water, sanitation, as well as roads. We also looked at the provision of building materials to beneficiaries whose dwellings had been destroyed. And in eThekwini itself, we performed follow-up work on water supply. As you know, that was a big feature of our initial report. And then in the Eastern Cape, we focused on mostly infrastructure-related matters relating to roads and bridges. And we also looked at infrastructure matters on water, especially in the OR Tambo district, for that is where they focused their attention and where they allocated funds. So that's what really forms the crux of this update to yourselves, honorable members, today. The overall message, which sits on the next slide, says that what we're seeing is that there's still slow response to the disaster. From the impact assessment to the delivery of services, or the actual implementation of the relief effort, there's still a great deal of time, a great extent of time in between those two activities. So we're seeing that there's still slow response. We are also seeing that these initiatives continue to be implemented in environments where internal controls are still quite weak. So the pre-existing deficiencies in terms of systems, processes, controls, the lack of capacity, as well as the inadequate intergovernmental coordination that we reported on last time around, we saw still being prevalent. The findings relate to delays in the spending of grant funding, which much of the grants had a particular time frame within which they needed to be spent. And we found that far too many municipalities did not spend that money in the time that was available. In fact, they ended up having to ask for extensions. More than not being able to comply with the grant regulations, it also tells us that the ability to respond to the disaster and to provide the necessary relief is not quite there, even though funds have been allocated. We also still saw that there were delivery failures, specifically due to the ineffective monitoring of contractors. On water tankering services, the same problems that we've reported on prevailed. And on procurement, we still saw that there were instances of non-compliance, as well as even non-submission of documentation, which, as you know, we'll note as a limitation of scope, but at its heart is an instance where accountability is hampered. We also saw that, fortunately, there were some municipalities that got things right, where they put in place sound preventative controls over what they were spending, and we didn't have any material findings in that regard. Specifically, Winima Dikizela Mandela, local municipality, which, as you know, got its second clean audit this year. They didn't have any significant findings on the work that we did in assessing their relief efforts relating to the flood disaster. Much of it was because they had strong monitoring and oversight on the projects that they were implementing, which are the same controls that we've been advocating for in respect of the other municipalities as well. We also saw that there were other municipalities, which I'll talk about when I deal with the specific findings, where there were instances where things actually ran quite well. And the benefit is really to citizens who must benefit from infrastructure repairs and maintenance, as well as new infrastructure that is put in place at a time when they most need it. I'll now turn to the story on what we saw in KZN. I'll deal with KZN and then I'll go to Eastern Cape. In KZN, when we reflected on the spending by the province, we looked at the funds that were made available, and what we saw was that there was still slow response, as I've indicated. Key messages for the KZN municipalities: still slow implementation of municipal commitments, which affects citizens because they don't get access to services in a sufficient and timely manner. We still saw that there was a lack of disaster readiness as provided for by the Disaster Management Act. For example, in eThekwini, there was the disaster management plan was not updated on time. Management also did not exercise the necessary oversight on the quality of work that contractors delivered. And as a consequence, you had building material that is purchased and is left exposed, and as a result, it gets destructed. You also had instances where roads were damaged. The contractor should have been required to put in place signage that would warn residents around the dangers of driving on specific roads. That didn't happen, and as a consequence, the well-being of people was compromised. The safety and well-being was compromised. We also identified that there was still a lack of coordination between the different spheres of government, between province and the metro, but also importantly within the metro itself, there were instances where the different divisions of the metro were not coordinating their efforts. And we placed that in the story about management oversight, management supervision, because the person at the center, specifically the accounting officer, should be able to coordinate all of the efforts across the municipality and not allow gaps to arise where one department does something, the other one does something different or at a different time, and ultimately citizens suffer and they don't get value for money. And we also saw that there were still instances where beneficiaries were left without housing, roads that were not accessible, or the insufficient supply of water because of these management practices that were weak. Within the metro itself, we looked at 4 specific areas, which is now on the next slide. The repairs to Tongaat water treatment plant. We looked at the building materials. We looked at the repairs to flood damaged roads, and then the water supply through tankering services. The initiatives were funded through a combination, and this is on the next slide. Marco, if we could move on to the next slide. They were funded through a combination of funding sources, being internal funds, loans, as well as grants that were available to them. And here we still found that the implementation of projects still took a long time. Even the implementation of commitments that were made following our last report, especially on water tankering services, those commitments were not implemented. And as a result, we had similar findings this time around. The readiness for managing the disaster was not there. And then, as I said, ineffective monitoring and a lack of coordination had a detrimental impact on delivery. And then on the Tongaat water treatment works, what we found was that we actually visited the site a few times. At the initial start of the problems, we went again post the initiative to repair the wastewater treatment works to inspect how things were looking following the repairs that were done. And what we found was that this being a very significant project, following the floods, there was 36.7 million rand allocated as an emergency project to restore the operations of this wastewater treatment works, which services a community of 300,000 strong. And the project was meant to run from the 13th of July 2022 to the 26th of October 2022. And what we'll show you now is how exactly that what we've seen around how that project was implemented. The pace of implementing the project would have had a detrimental impact on people because they had to then rely on water tankers for water supply whilst the repairs were underway. I think on the next slide, then we go into some detail on what we saw in terms of this particular project. There was a delay in providing water to communities because following the commissioning of this project, we went to inspect the site. So it was commissioned in October. We went in November to have a look at how the plant was operating. And we found that, yes, it was operating, but it was operating below the capacity that had been intended. It was meant to be providing 14,000 litres per day due to the problems with bulk supply pipelines to Tongaat South, Mamba Ridge, Belvedere, and Imona reservoirs. And what we found was that operations and the maintenance team at the Metro's water services unit did not assess or repair the pipelines before they restored operation, which then delayed the operational testing and caused further delay on providing water to communities, whom, as you know, would have been without water since April 2022. So as at the 11th of November, when we went to see the site, it was not operating in the way that it should. And so you had residents still struggling to get water in the way that they should. And the second thing that we found was that there was a lack of coordination to repair the damaged infrastructure. As you'll see in the pictures there was significant damage to the infrastructure, which then wasn't coordinated in terms of making sure it's repaired on time, and that by the time the wastewater treatment works repair program is installed and commissioned, there is the requisite supply of water at that time. And this we saw was a result of the lack of coordination between the Metro and the Department of Water and Sanitation, because together they should have been able to plan for fortifying the riverbanks next to the treatment works. What we're finding is that because the treatment works are so close to the river, when the riverbanks are not fortified, it may indeed result in water flowing in and flooding the treatment works if the river level rises. So the benefit of the repair program might even not be felt for an extended period. These are still problems related to poor planning, poor project management, and poor coordination within the municipality, but also between the municipality and the Department of Water and Sanitation in this instance. I think we can move on to the next slide. We looked at the matters around providing access to building materials for people who had lost their homes so that they could build. What we found is that the basic controls over supplying these building materials to beneficiaries were inadequate or ineffective. There wasn't adequate policy clarity, but also policy management to ensure that materials were supplied to the intended beneficiaries. We still found that beneficiary lists that were used to source funding contained inaccuracies and also included unapproved beneficiaries. When we did our testing, there were some beneficiaries who were deceased. There were beneficiaries who should not have been on the list because they were not deserving beneficiaries. What we found was that there were even beneficiaries that had invalid ID numbers. That is a key control that should be put in place so that the benefit accrues to the people that are intended to receive it and not to others. And this might sound familiar to you because it's the type of testing we would have done when we did our work initially on the COVID response. And then another issue we found with the building materials is that once they were on site, they were left exposed to the elements, which is a matter that should not have arisen because then they get damaged and they are not able to be used to good effect. And then we looked at the repairs to the flood damaged roads. I've talked about the matter around signage in terms of monitoring the work of contractors, but some of the findings we had were that site assessments were not done on time or accurately so that there was a clear and documented decision on what was being prioritized. And that's quite crucial. If the decision-making by the municipality is not documented and clear, it then becomes very difficult to deal with accountability, but also with building trust and confidence of citizens. The threshold funding for disaster management was not in place. And that's really a matter about management disciplines within the municipality. They're supposed to prepare a budget every year that includes a budget for repairs and maintenance, which we know that they don't adequately do so, but they're supposed to also prepare a budget to deal with disasters if and when they should arise. And that's part of the resilience disciplines for the municipality. That they did not have that threshold funding in place made it difficult for them to access additional funding from the national coffers. So that's a discipline that we have recommended that the city deals with. In as much as they must have a proper maintenance plan for all their infrastructure, budget for that infrastructure maintenance program, they should also have a funding plan to deal with disasters should they arise. We still saw that there were instances of supply chain management processes that were not being complied with, which led to delays in contracting, resources not being put in place. Some instances, some of these decisions took a good 3 months to put in place. And in a disaster, that should not be the case. Quite often, municipalities contend that the supply chain management regulations make it difficult for them to operate in an emergency and to be responsive. What we're finding is that the problem is not so much the regulations, but the disciplines within that municipality to ensure that the regulations that apply to a disaster are properly implemented in a way that still safeguards transparency, accountability, and efficiency. And then we also saw that even though they complained about regulations that make it difficult to procure quickly, they would then go into deviations, which then they don't document properly. And then it becomes difficult to understand for accountability what form the basis of the selections of particular suppliers. So the story will sound quite familiar, honourable members, but I think it does bear repeating that there is absolutely no other recipe to dealing with institutional integrity and resilience than to put in place those key disciplines around how procurement must operate and the key disciplines of how that is monitored and supervised. Then the next slide deals with the water tankering services. This one, I think you're well acquainted with because we dealt with it in quite a lot of detail in the last report. This time around, we did some follow-up procedures. So in October of this past year, 2022, we went to see how things were looking following our previous report. The recommendations were given as well as the commitments made. We still found that there was still slow progress in implementing the commitments made. And the impact was that communities were still not receiving enough clean drinking water. For example, in Pinetown, the blood bank informal settlements, the residents had not received water for 2 months and were using water from a nearby river, which when we looked at it, actually looked contaminated, the river that is. And had there been adequate attention to improving the efficiency and the effectiveness of the water tankering services that were being paid for, that community would have had access to water through the water tanks instead of relying on water from a river that looks contaminated. In Tongaat, the Kwasani informal settlement, we found that there was one JoJo tank, which was 5,000 liters, which was available to be used by a community of 1,000 residents, which is also then filled only once a week. When we look at that, with being the 1,000 people with a 5,000 liter JoJo tank filled once a week, it does not meet the Water Services Act requirements of providing a minimum of 25 liters per person per day. And that again happens because of the poor monitoring and oversight disciplines over the services offered by the water tankering services. I think I just want to highlight one other matter in terms of the things we see. The findings that we raised in the August 2022 report remain relevant. Communities are not receiving enough drinking water, clean drinking water. The needs assessments are not being done comprehensively. There's still a lack of coordination between government departments to validate payments, and there are still inadequate processes to manage the water tankering service providers. And the rates being paid to a number of these water tankers are quite exorbitant. We also found that some of the services could benefit from actually dealing with the scheduling of water tankers in terms of when they go and monitoring that. Actually dealing with ensuring that the filling points are adequately monitored and managed, and ensuring that there is a recording of what the water tankering services are looking like, where they're going, what they're delivering and when, and also ensuring that the condition of the water tankers themselves is monitored. So we've given those recommendations as things to be dealt with in the way that we did back in August 2022. The next set of slides, honourable members, deals with specific municipalities. I'll just highlight, for I'm aware that you have the pack of slides with you. In Guadubuza, we looked at the work of rehabilitating the damaged road infrastructure. And here there was a budget of 125 million rand allocated, and some of it had been spent as of November 2022. What we found was that in this municipality, they also didn't have a disaster management plan that was reviewed. They didn't do enough needs assessment. The scope of work that was designed was not well defined, and there was poor workmanship in terms of the work done by the contractor. The disaster relief funding was not adequate, and that again relates to the matter about the threshold funding. If the municipality is not disciplined about putting aside funds for possible disasters, they then cannot access additional funds out of the threshold funding. So that's a discipline that needs to be put in place. And we also found that some of the roads were completed, were signed off as completed, payments were made, but when we went to inspect them, it was clear that the work had not been completed. And some of the roads didn't have road markings or signs. But that is still, once again, a matter around poor procurement exercises, poor project management exercises, and the poor discipline of monitoring the work of contractors and ensuring that payments are made only when there is proper verification that the work has been delivered at the right quality and at the right time. When that doesn't happen, you end up with infrastructure paid for, but with little value in the ground. And that has a detrimental impact on the lives of citizens. Ilembe district, a very similar set of findings, although here it wasn't about roads, it was more about the reticulation works and sewer line repairs. And there was a 19.5 million rand budget here. And some of the money had been spent as at the end of May 2023. And we actually looked more recently to check how they were progressing in implementing the budget. And we also looked at the water supply using tankering services. Key findings were that the disaster management plan, whilst they do have one in draft, it doesn't address all of the key deliverables. They also didn't have enough funding to deal with the disaster relief because they don't have the discipline of budgeting for it, and they couldn't access the threshold funding. However, even with the funding that was in place, they then delayed in implementing the response. The critical repairs to the wastewater treatment plant were not included in the needs assessment that was done initially, which will then have the impact of delaying the urgent repairs to the wastewater treatment plant. One of the things that also makes it difficult for this municipality to respond to the disaster is that not only do they not have the discipline of setting aside funds for the disaster, but they don't have the discipline of budgeting for and planning for and executing a maintenance project for their infrastructure. In terms of the water tankering services, similar issues about not managing the scheduling, not managing the filling points, and not monitoring and recording how the water tankering services are fulfilling their obligations. We're also still seeing that there is still an opportunity for better coordination within the municipality as well as with other stakeholders. The lack of readiness in terms of dealing with the disaster. is indicative of a control environment that's not characterized by strength, by stability, and by ongoing monitoring and oversight, which would then translate into other services by the municipality as well. Ugu District Municipality, here our focus was on the water tankering services. And what we found was that there was, I beg your pardon, 10 million rand spent as at the end of May. The key findings that we had related to matters around insufficient supply of water to communities. And there were communities that still sat for months without access to clean drinking water because of the poor monitoring of the services provided by the tankering services. There was also an instance where we found that there was a community, Kwakuseni community, where the water tankers delivered water that was discolored. In our observation, and you'll see it on the picture there, it would appear that that water was dirty. And yet that was the water that was being delivered to be used by that community. We also found that in the Shongwe area, the community members were still relying on fetching water from the local river because they were not able to access water from the tankering services. That's still about the poor monitoring of the water tankering service providers. Zululand District Municipality, we looked at the repairs to the damaged infrastructure. And here the water services infrastructure grant was being used and had been reprioritized to ensure that it was spent on responses to the disaster. Out of the 25 million rand that had been prioritized, as at the end of May 2023, we found that 24 million rand had been spent. When we went to look at the specific project, which is specifically on the wastewater treatment works repairs, we could not find any significant audit findings. The repairs on the project were found to be in line with specifications, and there were controls of monitoring how the contractor was dealing with that repair project. So that's a bit of good news in terms of how, when there is adequate oversight and discipline, you do get the benefit of funds being spent in a way that's consistent with the plans, and the delivery of the repair work is done on time and at the right quality. In the OR Tambo District Municipality, we looked at the water and sanitation infrastructure damage and the response thereto. 24 million rand out of a 46.9 million rand grant had been spent at the end of May 2023. And here we found that there was still slow response. This was done over an extraordinarily long time. And we also found that there was non-compliance with the procurement processes. There were awards made to service providers that didn't meet tax compliance requirements from SARS. And we also found that there were procurement awards and expenditure information that were not submitted for audit. And as I indicated before, we will document it as a limitation of scope for audit. But what we understand it to be is that it limits the transparency and accountability obligations of the leadership of that municipality. What we found was that the spending even in OR Tambo district was so slow that they'd asked to have it extended so they could spend over an additional period. However, when we look at the pace of the implementation of the project, it doesn't look like it's going to meet even the given time frame for delivery. Just to give you a high-level view of what we've looked at in the Eastern Cape, which is on the next slide, we looked at the different municipalities and they're listed there. Having looked at their budgets and what they've spent up until the end of May 2023, and we've given a sense of what the key findings were for each of those municipalities in relation to how they have dealt with the municipal disaster relief grant. Much of their work related to the rehabilitation of damaged road infrastructure. I won't go into that in detail unless the honourable members have specific questions that they will want to pose on particular municipalities. But for the moment, I think I will move on towards the summation of what we've been saying through this detail. The call to action, honourable members, is that is the same as what we would have said in August when we did the first real-time audit. And it is that the preparedness of intergovernmental activities remains core in responding to citizens in the space of a disaster. And we also believe that government should act with urgency to restore livelihoods and to improve services. Standing back, there are 4 areas that I would want to highlight. The first one is that leadership must take urgent action by the specific committed dates to respond to the matters that we've raised so that they can ensure that they alleviate the hardship of the flood victims. I would also want to reiterate that even in the time of crisis, the quality of delivery and the value for money aspirations, those must remain non-negotiable. Preventative controls should be implemented to avoid failure in infrastructure rebuilding programs. And government should continue to build disaster management capabilities within individual institutions, but across the accountability ecosystem, so that as we live in a world that has got more uncertainty than ever before and more likelihood of disasters going forward, we then build resilience within institutions, but also across the entire state to be able to respond competently to such disasters. Lastly, Chair, when we tabled our special report, there were questions that the honourable members raised about the Northwest, and specifically Deelpan. In March 2022, the floods affected Deelpan village, which is in Dzwaying local municipality in the Northwest. And in response, that disaster was included in the state of disaster that was ultimately declared. The assessment done by the Northwest Department of Human Settlements indicated that Deelpan village is located in a wetland without water channels, and therefore it is unsuitable for human settlement. The Ngakamudiri Mulema district municipality is the district municipality that's responsible for that area. They have spent a total of 1 million rand. This is now in 2022, to provide relief and services to Deelpan. And the spending was mainly on mobile toilets and on transporting people from flooded areas to a community hall. And furthermore, the district offers support and assistance through using existing contracts, such as the expenditure for providing plant hire so that gravelled roads could be attended to. We audited the contract management of how these existing contracts were being used, and we did not find any material problems. The municipality did not receive a budget specifically allocated for the disaster relief in Deelpan, and as a result, it actually used its equitable share to cover the expenditure. So that's the district. And a bit of feedback on the local municipality, Dzwaying. They spent a total of 348,000 rand, and this was mostly for supplying tents, chairs, tables, etc., for an event where there was an address to the Deelpan community. We've identified that provincial departments have been earmarked to assist with disaster relief, and we are currently in the process of auditing those provincial departments and their expenditures. As you know, the PFMA audits are currently underway, and at that time, we'll be able to provide you with some insight on what we're seeing around how the different provincial departments are dealing with this disaster. I hope that this provides you with the type of feedback that you are looking for in terms of what was the response at Deelpan. And just to summarize, there was some support from the district, and there was some work within the local municipality. However, much of it will come through the work of the provincial departments that have been identified to deal with this. And when we audit for PFMA and finalize those audits later this year, we normally sign off at the end of July 2023. When we do that, we'll be able to provide further feedback on that. As you are well aware, honourable chairs and honourable members, when we did the 2022 special report that we tabled in August of 2022, we had hoped to do yet another special report, but there was always a caveat that that special report would only happen if there was significant expenditure. Since then, and you'll see there wasn't significant expenditure other than what happened in the municipalities, which is why I took the view that it was better to audit the different initiatives in each of the institutions that are affected and to report on them in this way. And we'll do the same thing for PFMA. And that is the feedback that we have for you, honourable chairs and honourable members. Thank you very much for your attention.
No, thank you to the AG for that very comprehensive report and the work that has gone into specifically highlighting the areas of our what we want to focus on, our focus areas. I now want to open and give also the opportunity to the Honourable Nyambi to take this part of the meeting in terms of questions of clarity forward, and then we'll interact on that. Honourable Nyambi.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Greetings to AG, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It will be in order to go straight to the deliberations as you have highlighted, Co-Chair. It's a comprehensive report, confirmation of some of the things we pick on the ground, and if we can go to the detailed report that we compiled, part of the issues are still confirming what we discovered when we went to different provinces. Let me allow colleagues to engage with the comprehensive report by the AG. It's not a matter of must. If it's coming from that comprehensive report and the members are satisfied, they don't have anything to raise, but they are going to use the report as a guide as we're starting next week, going to other different provinces. I'll allow you, Co-Chair, if there's anything from your side.
No, thank you, Honourable Nyambi. We must keep in mind that the elements that are in this report, of course, also form part of the broader report that was tabled by the AG and that is being looked at in various portfolio committees already. I think the information available to us will empower us when we go to these very specific areas again, and the matters of emphasis that has been raised by the AG for us to look into that. And it will generally equip all the members to be able to interact at this level when we go into the areas. I want to ask Nola, the committee secretary, to share this report to all members of the Ad-Hoc committee, the joint Ad-Hoc committee, so that they familiarize themselves with the issues that are at hand. Apart from that, co-chairperson, there's nothing else from me. I think after the AG is released, there's just in-house matters that we can possibly deal with. But over to you, co-chairperson.
Thanks, Co-Chair. Let me take this opportunity on behalf of all the members of the committee and my co-chair once again to thank you, AG, and your team for always being. Oh, before I can do that, let me allow Honourable Zungula. Honourable Zungula.
My apologies, Chair, for delaying to raise my hand. I just have two questions for the AG. The first one is it not possible to have the intervention, kind of interventions before, a final, like before some of these things happen? In other words, to prevent some of these happening instead of coming after the fact. The second one is there a possibility of submission of these cases to the NPA or SIU? Because I think some of the findings are very they are very, very serious in my view. So it was only those two questions, Chair. My apologies once more for raising my hand late.
No problem, Honorable Zungula. AG?
Thank you very much, Honorable Co-Chair and Honorable Zungula. The interventions before, so as the AG, we can only audit. So a real-time audit allows us to audit quickly as soon as the transactions have happened. It allows us to provide some insight on what are the things to be done to prevent problems, but then we can only audit once something has happened. We've done this audit quickly enough so that the things that are going wrong can be corrected. It then becomes quite crucial for those that run government to respond to our guidance on what to prevent, our guidance on what to deal with as we've identified through our audits. It's also important for other players in the ecosystem of accountability to do their part. So the examples that we've given around what we saw happening in the KZN province, specifically around the internal auditors in education, as well as the work of the provincial treasury around the procurement matters. Those are the things that will help to prevent matters. So I hope that helps. What I'm saying is there are different role players with different roles. Ours is to highlight potential problems, but then we can only detect them once they've happened. There are other people who are in the chain to try and avoid them becoming real problems before we pick them up. Then the matter of submissions to law enforcement, as you're aware, we do have these powers that allow us to refer matters to law enforcement. Where we find material irregularities, we do that. In a short space of time, we'll be able to table a full account of the type of MIs we've identified through this process and local government audit in its entirety and how we've dealt with those. So I think I'll be able to provide that insight at the time that we're ready to table that report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, AG. Thank you, Honorable Zungula. Nola, we have to do as per the request to distribute the comprehensive report to all the members so that we are on the same page. Let me take this opportunity once again to thank you, AG, and your entire team for always being available to share with us such a comprehensive report, and it's going to make us to be spot on in terms of the approach to the issues as we get to the ground and interact with the relevant stakeholders, affected areas, as the Ad-Hoc committee tasked with this responsibility. We thank you for always not hesitating as and when there is a request from our side to come and share such an information. With that, once again, and your entire team, you are released. Thanks a million times, AG. Your parting shot, AG?
Thank you very much, Honourable Co-Chair, and as well as Honourable Farlik and the Honourable members. Thank you once again for the opportunity for us to share the work that we've done. Indeed, we hope it does assist you. And as you know, if there's anything else as you prepare for your oversight visits, please do reach out and we'll be able to assist. But thanks once again for the opportunity to share this.
This new world of technology that we are no longer physically meeting, it's making some other things to be something else. But please, thanks a million times. And your team, you are released. It will be just members and the colleagues that will remain for the in-house to deal with the minutes of the previous meeting. Thanks, AG and your team. Nola, let's deal with the minutes quickly of the previous meetings.
All right. Thank you, Chairperson. Just before I hand over to my colleague, Mr. Kunene, who will be leading that process of the minutes, I would like to confirm that the report by the AG was sent through to members 2 weeks ago already. And then yesterday, again, it was resent to all members. So all members have the report respectively. I would now, through you, Chairperson, hand over to my colleague, Mr. King Kunene, who will be leading the process of the minutes. Thank you.
Mr. Kunene.
Thank you, Co-Chairperson Honorable Nyambi, and good morning, Honorable Frodick, our Co-Chair, Honorable members, and the colleagues. Nola, may you please give me the rights to share?
We are given responsibility without the rights to share.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Granted, Mr. Gunene, thank you.
Thank you. Chairperson, I would like to, we are having 3 sets of minutes that were done by the committee. So we'll start with the minutes of the 11th of April. I hope, I believe that members, they were circulated to members. The meeting was on the 11th of April, and then it was, the agenda was introduction of support personnel, and then the full areas focus areas for the draft program. We had Honorable Frolic, the co-chairperson who was leading, and then we had this personnel on the side of the administration. And then in the opening chair, the meeting was opened by the House Chair.
No, you can't be reading. The minutes were sent to members.
Yes, they were sent to
members. Sharing, moving, yeah.
So I would like to present these minutes, and then I think we can consider them. We'll hear any addition or any subtraction that the members have in towards adopting these minutes, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gunene. The first set, Honorable Frolic.
No, thank you, Honorable Nyambi. I've just checked the number of participants in this meeting, and we do not have sufficient members present in the meeting to adopt these minutes. I want to propose that the minutes stand over to the Sunday evening meeting, where we will get a briefing on the state of readiness for the visit next week to Gauteng, and then we will be able to adopt the minutes. But now we have insufficient number of members that are present.
Thank you. I entirely agree with you. Given the reality, there's nothing we can do beyond what you have said. We can just agree that we'll deal with them next Sunday. Nola, any other issue in relation to what will be happening next week that you want to bring to the attention of the meeting?
Thanks again, Chairperson. There's nothing much apart from what was already reported to the Honorable Co-Chairs, that the delegation will be traveling on the 18th to Gauteng to start work in Tshwane on the 19th, and then on the 20th and the 21st, we will be working in the city of Joburg. And this is obviously because we had initially planned that on day 3, we will be in Sedibeng, but we have not received any response, despite numerous follow-ups with the municipality. So clearly that then falls through, and we've decided to, we proposed to the co-chairs, and the proposal was supported, that we should rather take more sites from the city of Joburg, because that municipality has really been assisting, and they've given us all the information that we can work with. The plans are currently underway. We have even received a confirmation of the venue in Tshwane, and the city of Joburg is yet to come back to us regarding the exact venue that we'll be utilizing during the course of today. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Co-Chair.
No, thank you, Honorable Nyambi, and thank you for the committee secretary for the information. I'm aware that the NCOP, is it next Wednesday when you are considering the appropriation?
Yes.
Well, next Wednesday. So
Yes.
Keeping that in mind, I want us not to create a day 3 if it's not necessary for a day 3, because day 3 was supposed to be in Sedibeng. And Nola, let's see if we can move some of those commitments that we will have in the city of Joburg. If we can do it in the morning part. I'm not sure what time the sitting of the NCOP will be starting. It's quite an intensive process. If it's a morning sitting or afternoon sitting.
It's 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock.
Yes.
Okay. Nola, I'll have an offline discussion with you so that we can see how best we will be able to fit in the other sites that are being proposed for the meeting or for the visits to happen on Wednesday morning. We'll have an offline discussion, and the final program will be communicated to the members then. Thank you, Honorable Nyambi.
Thanks. which brings us to, unless there's any other thing from your side, Nola, that we might want to bring to our attention. Otherwise, we have covered almost everything.
Chair, just one more regarding KZN. Members would ordinarily remember that the program is indicating that we're starting on the 27th until the 29th, but that has since changed because the KZN province has its own program happening on the 27th, and therefore, as a matter of fact, the executive members of the KZN province won't be available, so they would rather send senior officials to be the committee on the 28th, and thus the program has changed to the 28th to the 30th of June instead of 27, 29 as initially planned. Thank you very much, Chairperson. That should be all from your side.
Thanks. We will deal with other issues as we move along, but otherwise, let me first let me take this opportunity to thank all of you, Nola, and the entire team for making it possible for us to have this meeting this morning. We've covered much ground. The comprehensive report from the AG will go a long way to assist us moving forward. Otherwise, from our side, there is nothing beyond what I've said. I'll allow my co-chair to do his parting shot.
Thank you, Honorable Nyambi. No, there's nothing more to add. We will deal with some of the in-house matters during the course of today. I asked Nola to call me after this meeting so that we can just give clear direction to her in terms of what to do. Thank you very much for the meeting. Thank you for your participation. The meeting is thus adjourned. Thank you.